Okay, so our next speaker is another Iranian activist. She's someone who's also been involved over time in the campaign against this growing roller coaster of war against Iran. Her name is Shirin Shafaie. She's a researcher in London at the School of Oriental and African Studies, and she's going to address you now. Shirin.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you so much for being here tonight. And I would also like to thank the Stop the War Coalition for organizing this panel in such timely manner. When I was asked last night by Chris to contribute to the panel in 10 minutes time, I felt uncomfortable how to pack all the aggressive measures against Iranian community, both in Iran and actually outside Iran, in only 10 minutes. But I'll try my best to first focus a little bit on the problem that exists and expand what other distinguished panelists talked about, and then maybe provide some solutions to avoid further escalation of the crisis between Iran and the West, and then finally refer to some of the alternative scenarios that may take place if we do not pursue those solutions. Well, as I said, the problem between Iran and the West is quite big, but the roots of the problem are not so clear, at least not in the media. One of the problems that the media and the Western propaganda suggest against Iran is the nature of its nuclear program. I'm not going to talk in too much detail about that because Abbas quite eloquently suggested most of the allegations. He explained the wrong nature of most of the allegations against Iran, but I would like to mention the problem with Iran's nuclear program, which in fact doesn't exist. There are more than 35 IAEA reports over years since 2003, and all of them suggest that the agency continues to verify the non-diversion of all nuclear materials in Iran, including what exists in outside facilities, namely in hospitals. So that is the fact, and that is something that has been provided to the agency by its own inspectors over hours of inspection, and Iran has remained the most accommodating and welcoming country to the IAEA inspectors than all the other member states combined. So that is the fact, and if anybody still has any doubts about that, they can go to IAEA own website and check out all these details in all IAEA reports. And then Abbas mentioned some of the allegations, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. So if the problem with Iran is not the nuclear program, then what is it? Is it the fact that the West cannot guarantee that Iran doesn't have an undeclared military nuclear intention? Well, Israel has an undeclared nuclear military program, and it has more than 200 nuclear warheads, but that is not a problem. So this cannot in principle be a problem. I'm going to discuss what is really the problem for the West regarding Iran. The main problem, as I suggest, is Iran's history that shows it has sustained its independence, its sovereignty, and its territorial integrity against all odds, against 8 years of foreign aggression on its territorial integrity and on its nation. So this is a bad influence for all the other nation states in the region who would probably think about becoming as independent as Iran is. So in fact, the West is not concerned with Iran's nuclear program, but with its behavior as an independent state in the region. On the other side of the story, there is another issue And while the West is creating a boogeyman out of Iran in the region to scare off all the other countries, it at the same time creates a very good market for its own military-industrial complex. And that is something that we are increasingly seeing in the region, and the most worrying example of that is the anti-missile shields which have been deployed to Arab countries of the Persian Gulf, and recently even to Turkey. So that is the problem. That is a real problem for Iran and for all other states. So when you make a boogeyman out of a country, then you can sell them all these arms, and the rising in the price of oil may not be so much of a problem. Why? Because you buy their oil expensively and then get all the money back by selling them all these expensive arms which have no use whatsoever. So that's the benefit of Iran's threat for the Western military-industrial complex. Well, now I'm going to see what could be the solution. Well, the solution, without a doubt, is diplomacy. But there are two ways of it. The first is diplomacy between the states, meaning between Iran and the states who are involved in the issue, but also diplomacy and track to endeavors by the civil society, by the anti-war movement, and by everyone who is concerned about the escalation of the tensions and crisis between Iran and the West. Well, the panelists mentioned that the war against Iran has indeed started ever since 1953. But I would also like to mention another important point alongside that argument, that these sanctions that are imposed against the Iranians, which are these aggressive measures, which are equivalent to torture by proxy, which is a typical method used by CIA against perceived enemies, these are an act of war in themselves. This is not so the anti-war community should not just wait until the bombs are dropped or until the announcement, until the war breaks out. At the moment, the sanctions which are imposed against Iran over 30 years, these are an act of war. And actually, the presidential candidate, American presidential candidate Ron Paul, has been really vocal about this, but unfortunately nobody listens to him in the US. But we should really support those politicians who put forward wise and sober arguments like this. So at the same time, I would really like everyone to, before they go ahead to demand stop of a war, avoid a war against Iran, a real military confrontation, really the protest and opposition to sanctions should also be integrated into everything that we do to de-escalate the tensions. And Iranians, they have never been officially colonized by this country, and they would like to keep that story intact. And so the sanctions, the possible oil embargo against Iran, this could at the same time rise the oil prices sky high, and this would have a catastrophic impact on the civil society, both in this country and in the US. So this has become, the Iran issue is now global. This is not just an issue for people who are, again, supporting Iran, but for anyone who wants to live in a peaceful world. And so very quickly, some of the things that the states can do. There is the Iran-Turkey-Brazil deal, which is now forgotten. And Turkey, we see that is moving towards, as I said, deploying anti-missile shields. So it should be reminded to come back and revive this deal. There's also Germany and France, who are members of 5+1, who are dealing with Iran in high-level negotiations. They are now kind of distracted with the European debt crisis without knowing that Iran could play a very important role in solving that problem. And if the problem is not solved, through Iran, it can, and if more problems are added because of Iran, then the European debt crisis can also get more complicated. And now some of the alternatives, because I don't have much time left, some of the alternative scenarios that may take place if the tensions is not de-escalated. First, if there is any attack against Iran whatsoever, I assure you that Iranian Majlis will going to withdraw from NPT right away, because the only reason they are in NPT now, they don't get any benefit from it, is to make to be a part of this international treaty, and also to make sure that no threat is imposed against them from that front. But if the threat becomes much more real, then they will withdraw from NPT, and that will mean the collapse of a non-proliferation treaty altogether. Another thing that Iranians could do is a preemptive export ban to oil. If they are brought to the edge of having very little, nothing to lose on the economic ground, then why not putting an oil embargo in the first place themselves? And now, the 6-month grace period is envisioned by the Western countries to put an oil embargo, to get the markets a chance to adapt to the new environment if the oil embargo is going to happen. But there is no guarantee that this 6 months is going to be that graceful. If there is an attack, then Iran may as well put a ban on its own export. And then the Strait of Hormuz and everything else that other panelists talked about. So the situation is quite serious and important. I would like to finally ask everyone to strongly protest and oppose first sanctions against Iran, and then any further military aggression. Thank you.